Why regression testing in Agile development challenging and how will you handle it? Okay. Now, why is regression testing in Agile challenging? Okay. Agile development approach is iterative. Okay. So every say for example, you are following Scrum is 2 to 4 weeks development cycle, mostly 2 weeks. Okay. It's kind of 90% plus organization. You will find that they are following 2 to 3 weeks development cycle. And in 2 to 3 weeks, development team, they build new features. Okay. So new features are added and defect fixes are done every sprint. Because of this new feature addition, every next sprint, you will have a new set of features or new code being added to the existing code, right? So say for example, sprint 1, developers build 5 user stories. So they'll write code for 5 user stories. Then in next sprint 2, they have picked 4 user stories. So they'll build code on top of whatever existing code was there in sprint 1, right? So there is a new addition of code. Now, when do we need regression testing? Any defect fixes or addition or any changes to the code. Now, in Agile development, there is an addition to the code or changes to the code every sprint. Okay. Every next sprint, there is a build or the development that happens on the previous build. So changes are happening continuously on the existing code. Maybe not every piece of code that has been written previously, but some or most part of the code that is being built previously is then again changed into the new sprint or built upon the previous code. Okay, not change, but in the next sprint, build upon the previous build or previous code that was done in previous. Because of that, there is a need for regression testing. Why? Because regression testing, when it is done, any defect fixes or any code changes to ensure that the new code that has been added or changed does not impact the existing functionality, right? So that is why regression testing in Agile is really challenging. Okay. So this is the first part of the question that you are going to answer. Why it is challenging? Then how will I handle it? Okay, I'll follow risk-based approach. Okay, risk-based testing approach to handle this. So in Agile, usually risk-based testing approach is helpful if you're not automating. Okay, if you're not automating your regression test suite every sprint, which becomes really tedious unless you have ample resources and support from the leadership. So when you are doing testing, say for example, sprint 1. Meanwhile, when you are done testing, you have to ensure that you also automate any regression test cases during that sprint itself. So you will need support. You will need people to quickly convert those test cases, regression test cases from sprint 1 into automated scripts so that they can be used in next sprint to execute automatically, right? So if that's not the case, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and follow the risk-based testing approach. In next sprint, I'll ask my developers and team members what all key features you are updating or building upon this particular sprint that I can go ahead and execute regression test for, right? So in sprint 1 itself, I'll go ahead and for each of the key functionalities, I'll start preparing the regression test suite. So I'll add some test cases into regression test suite. And then in next sprint, I'll execute those. So if I'll follow risk-based testing approach in next sprint, I'll say only this functionality has been updated as part of sprint 2. So I'll only execute 3 test cases instead of 30 test cases that I have identified as my regression test. So following that, if you don't have the automated regression test. So risk-based testing approach will help you. Best part or best thing to do in Agile development to handle regression testing is to automate. So try to automate regression test suite, and that will be the best approach to basically handle regression testing in the Agile development, right? Now let me quickly go to the whiteboard, okay? And I'll also draw this and explain this, okay? Okay, so when we say Agile, right? So we have sprints, okay? So for example, 2 to 4 weeks, okay? So just consider this as a timeline, okay? 2 to 4 weeks. Now in this 2 to 4 weeks, developers will pick certain user stories. So they'll say, for example, 1, 2, or they picked 5 user stories. And testers will start testing or test these 5 user stories when they build. Now tester will then identify what all regression test cases are there out of these. Okay, so they will prepare a regression test suite from this sprint. Okay, then in sprint 2, okay, so sprint 2 started. Okay, and in sprint 2 there will be more user stories that will be built, right? So this is the timeline. So there will be more user stories that will be built. So this regression suite that has been prepared from first sprint either needs to be executed fully, because there are, as part of the new sprint, right? So sprint 2, so this is sprint 1, sprint 2, you are building, your development team is building on top of whatever code has been written here. Okay, so there are changes in the code, so ideally you should be executing this whole regression test cases again in sprint 2. Then in sprint 3, okay, because it's incremental and iterative development, until and unless all the functionalities that are required by the application are being built, you will follow these 2 to 4 week sprints. Okay, so every sprint will be building on top of what? On top of the previous code that was there. Okay, and every sprint there will be new additions to the regression suite. New test cases will be added from each of the sprint, right? So your regression test suite initially in sprint 1 was 10 test cases, sprint 2 was 15, sprint 3 was 25, sprint 4 it will become 35, sprint 5 it will become 50, right? So every sprint your regression test suite will increase. So you can imagine, can you accommodate these 50 test cases that you have accumulated as part of the previous 4 sprints to execute in sprint 5 along with the new features that you are testing? That is a lot of overhead. So what will you do? Will you keep adding more team members to execute this regression test suite if you are doing it manually? No, right? That's not a feasible approach. So what you will follow? You will follow risk-based testing, right? So RBT, if you are doing it manually. So you will have a team meeting, what all key features you are changing on top of what you have built previously. Then out of that, you will say, okay, out of these 50, I'll execute, 5 or 10 test cases. All right. Then you will be able to manage that regression problem into your agile development. Best option is to automate all of these in every sprint. So for example, in first sprint there were 10 test cases. You have the support from the team. There are automation SDECs that will basically go ahead and automate these. Then in next sprint there are 5 more test cases. They are also automated. So by sprint 4 you have 50 test cases. They are all automated. So in sprint 5 you have automated test suite that can be easily run while you are focusing on the progression testing, right? So this is how you can basically draw and explain why it becomes challenging, why regression testing becomes challenging, and how to overcome it. If you are not doing automation, follow risk-based testing approach. If you are doing automation, well and good, right? So this is how I'll be going ahead and approaching regression testing and its challenges into the agile software development. Okay.